Good morning, everyone. Sorry I can't be there with you today since we wrote our test on Friday, finishing off our periodic trig unit. We now are looking at our last unit in finance. So to start off our finance unit, we are going to be looking at simple interest. So to start off, we're just going to watch a video about interest. Okay, so now that we've watched that video, that gives us a nice little introduction into interest. Let's just look at what is interest. So let's list out, so we have it in our notes, what interest is. So the first thing is that it's a percentage of the money borrowed or the money that's invested. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you get charged interest to make money, or it encourages faster payment of the loan because you have to pay that interest the longer you have that loan. The last thing about interest is that you get paid interest to encourage you to put your money in the bank. So those are some of the key points that we've learned about interest from that video. Once everyone's had a chance to write this down, if needed, please pause the video. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So we're going to look at simple interest. So our definition is interest that is calculated only at the original principal amount. Remember that in the video we just watched, they talked about simple interest, but they also mentioned something called compound interest. Today we are simply just looking at simple interest. We'll look at compound interest tomorrow. So this interest is calculated only on the original principal amount. So only at the original amount that either you put into the bank or the original amount that you're getting a loan. It's the amount that you're getting from the bank. So our formula that we're given for simple interest is that I is equal to P times R times T. So we define here what each of those variables mean. P is our principal, it's our starting or original amount, and it's in dollars. I is our interest earned, so that's how much interest you earn over the amount of time, so over the year, let's say.
Mr. Co-Chair, could you call extension 3?
Sorry about that. So I is our interest earned in dollars. R is our interest rate per year. So as a decimal, it's not a percentage. So that's the important thing with interest rate. Typically, it's given to us in a percentage. So you'll say that your interest rate is, let's say in the video, they talked about a 5% interest rate. But when we actually use it in this formula to actually calculate out something else in this equation, we need to put it as a decimal, not as a percentage. So please note, you cannot plug in percentages into equations. They must be in decimal form. So we must do that conversion first. The last piece in our formula is T. T is for time in years. And it's always in years. So if we're given a value that's not in years, we need to adjust it so that it is in terms of years, because that's how simple interest works. So again, at this point, if people still are writing, pause the video. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So example number 1. It asks us how much simple interest will you earn if you invested $500 for 8 months at 5.2% per year. So to start off, let's pull out all of the key pieces of information that we're given. So we list out, we know that it's simple interest because they tell us that it's simple interest. So we know we're going to use our equation that I is equal to P times R times T. So let's list out our variables as to what's given and what's unknown. So we know what we're trying to solve for and what pieces of information they give us. So it's asking us how much simple interest will you earn. So that's asking us how much interest do we get, and that's in a dollar amount. So the I is the part of the equation that we're solving for. Then it tells us if you invest $500. So it tells us how much we're investing. That's our principal or our starting amount. So that's our P value. It then tells us that we're investing that $500 for 8 months. That's our time. But remember, we just said that our time needed to be in years. So if we have 8 months, we need to convert that to how much is that in a year. So what we do is, because there's 12 months in a year, we divide that value by 12 to figure out how much in a year that is. So 8 divided by 12, if we simplify that out, that's the fraction of 2/3. So it's 2/3 of a year is 8 months. So that's the value that we're going to plug in for T, because it must be in years. So we have to do that conversion of dividing the months by 12. Our last piece is our interest rate. It's given to us in a percentage, so 5.2% is how much we're earning, how much interest we're earning. But remember, you can't plug in a percentage into an equation. So we need to take our 5.2% and we need to convert it into a decimal value. And remember, to convert percentages into decimals, we just divide by 100. So 5.2% divided by 100, that gives us 0.052 as our interest rate. Now that we've listed all our key pieces and we know our one unknown value, let's plug it into our equation and solve. So I is equal to our 500 multiplied by our rate of 0.052 and multiplied by our number of years, which is 2/3. When you're typing that into your calculator, you can type that in all at once if you like. Do 500 multiplied by 0.052, then multiply that by 2 and divide by 3. So you can do that all at once. You don't have to show the separate steps. And you should get 17.33. If there's multiple decimals, because we're dealing with money in this unit, you should always round to only 2 decimal places. So no matter what, because we're always dealing with money, round to 2 decimal places in our answers. And because it's a word problem, we need to have a therefore statement. So therefore, oops. So therefore, the interest earned, sorry, just having some technical difficulties here. The interest earned is 17.33. And that's our answer. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. Oh, sorry, I missed. We have part B on this one. So let's actually scroll down here. Part B. Asks us how much is the investment worth after 8 months. For this one, because it's asking us how much is the investment worth after that 8 months, what we can do is we use A for our total amount, so our current amount, what it is right now. If we take that value and we do our principal, which was our original amount, and add in how much interest we've made over these 8 months, which we just calculated in part A, we can get our total worth of our investment right now. Well, this is the equation that we use. So when they ask for how much an investment is worth in total after a certain amount of time, we use this equation here, P plus I. And because it's asking after the 8 months, we've already calculated that I value, which was in part A, and our principal amount, that was 500. So we do 500 plus our interest, which was 17.33. So we get that our current investment is worth, when we add them up, 517.33. And again, because it's a word problem, all of our finance questions are going to be in terms of word problems. So we need to always have therefore statements in this unit. Therefore, the investment sorry about that. Is worth $517.33. So that's our final answer for that one. Let's take a look at the next page. So example number 2, it asks us what investment rate did you get if you invested $26,000 for 2 years and you earned $500 in interest. So again, let's list out all of our variables. Pull out all the numbers that we know and figure out which one we're trying to solve for. So looking at our question, it's asking us what interest rate did you get? So because it's asking us for what interest rate we got, that means we are looking for R, because that's our interest rate. That's our variable for our interest rate. It then tells us that we invested $26,000. Whenever we invest an amount, that's our principal, our starting amount. So that's our $26,000. And then it tells us that we invested this $26,000 for 2 years. So that's our time variable. We have 2. And because it's already in years, we don't need to do any other calculations. It's already in years, we can just leave T as 2. The last piece of information that it gives us is it tells us that we earned $500 in interest, and that means our I value then is $500. So now that we have listed out all our key information and we have our one variable that we're solving for, let's plug it into our equation. Remember, our equation is that I is equal to PRT. So our I value is 500. Our principal value is 26,000. Our rate, we don't know, that's what we're trying to solve for, so we leave our R variable, and our T is 2. So now that we've plugged all our variables in, we now need to rearrange and solve for our R value. The first thing that can be done is we can put the two numbers here because all three of these pieces are multiplied together. We can multiply the 26,000 by the 2. So we multiply the 26,000 by 2, we get 52,000, and that's multiplied by R. Our next step now to get the R all by itself is we need to take this 52,000 and shift it to the other side. And because it's multiplied by R, that means we need to divide by the 52,000. So we're going to divide by both sides so that our R value, when we divide out 500 by 52,000, we get 0.0096. Now, because this is a rate, we need a few extra decimals to figure out what that rate is. So we have 0.0069. But remember, our rates, when we're thinking about in terms of word problems, when we word it, we use a percentage. So we need to turn this into a percentage. So then we multiply it by 100 so that we get 0.96%. And that's because whenever we're talking about rates, or it's worded out in a word problem, it should be in percentages, but then we have to remember to do that conversion because we can only use decimals in equations when we're solving. And again, because it's a word problem, we need our therefore statement. So therefore, we got an interest rate of 0.96%. So let's take a look at our next example. Okay, so example number 3. How long did you invest $300 if you ended up with $420 and the investment paid 4.2% per year? So again, let's start with our key information. Pull each of our variables out. So it's asking us how long did you invest? So when it ever asks a question about how long something is, that's always time. So the variable we're trying to find is our time variable. It says then, how long did you invest $300? Whenever we see the word invest, that means that's our principal amount. So our starting amount then is 300. Then says if you ended up with $420 and the investment paid was 4.2%. So it tells us that we ended up with $420. That's not how much interest we made. That's how much we ended up with after our interest had been paid. So to get the value for our interest, we need to take that $420 and minus out our principal amount to figure out how much interest we then made on our investment. So because we're told that we ended up with and had at the end of this period of time, we ended up with $420. If we minus out the original amount that we put into that bank or in that investment, then we will get how much interest we made over time. So 420 minus 300 is $120 in interest. So that was a little extra step to figure out how much our interest value was. And the last piece tells us that the investment paid 4.2% per year. And so whenever there's a percentage, that's our interest rate. So 4.2%. And remember, we need to divide by 100 to get our decimal value. So that's 0.042 for our interest rate. So then we go to our equation now that we have all our key pieces of information. Plug in what we know. We know our interest value is 120. We know our principal is 300. We know our interest rate is 0.042. And then we're trying to solve for time, so we leave our variable t. Now we need to solve for t. So let's put these two numbers together here. We multiply the 300 by the 0.42. So that we get 12.6. T. And then to get our t by itself, we need to divide out by that 12.6. So when we do 120 divided by 12.6, we get 9.5, and there's a bunch of other decimals. We can leave that as 9.5 when we round. So we round up to 9.5. And then we need our therefore statement. So therefore it took 9.5 years to get that amount in money. So that's our answer. So let's take a look at the next example. Example number 4 says, how much money would you put in your bank account that has an interest rate of 4% so that in 3 years you can buy a computer that costs $500? So let's start off by listing out the key information that we're given in our simple interest equation. Let's go through our question. It's asking us how much money would you put in your bank account? So because it's asking us about how much money we want to put in our bank account, that's asking us how much do we originally want to invest? What is our starting value? So that's our P value. That's telling us what our starting value is because it's asking us, how much we want to put into our bank account. It then tells us that it has an interest rate of 4%. So again, that's our R value. So we take our 4%, we divide it by 100 to get 0.04. So you notice I didn't show that calculation. That's okay. You don't have to show it every single time. I started off by showing that interest rate calculation so that you would see where that value is coming from. But once you get a hang of it, you can just jump from there to there. You take your 4%, you divide it by 100. That's our rate of 0.04. The next piece of information is that we put it in for 3 years. So that's our time times 3. And it asks us so that you can buy a computer that costs $500. So in the end, we need a value of $500. So for this question, at the end there, when it says to buy a computer that costs $500, that means that in the end, we need to have $500. So it doesn't give us anything about our interest rate, our I value here. So let's think back about our equations and what we can use to help us. So remember in that first example in part B, we talked about that our total amount that we use for A is equal to our principal amount added to our interest amount. Now, we don't have we don't have P or I, so that doesn't particularly help us. But what do we know that I is equal to? We know from our simple interest equation that I is equal to, sorry, it's supposed to be a plus, that I is equal to P times R times T. So all I'm doing there is I'm using this idea that principal plus the interest gives us our total amount. And instead of using I, I'm plugging in that I is equal to P times R times T because that's our simple interest equation, that I is equal to that. So we can plug that in instead of I. Now we no longer have an I value in this equation. The last thing that we want to do is we want to rearrange this a little bit so that we only have one P value because that's what we're trying to solve for, and we only want one of them. So what we can do is we can factor a P out of both of those two pieces. So we take that P value out front, and if we divide both of these terms by P, so P divided by P, that just gives us 1. And PRT, if we divide out that P, that just gives us plus RT. So now we have a new equation that uses simple interest, but it no longer uses this I value, and instead it uses A, which is our final amount. So in this equation, we don't actually use, or in this problem, we don't actually use our I value. We use our A value, and our A value is our ending cost, which is the $500. So that's our end cost / amount. And that's just a little arrow pointing up to the A, so we're putting a note here that our A value is our end cost / amount, and that's why it's the 500. So now we're using this equation. So this is another equation that we can use when we're talking about simple interest. So from now on, you don't have to always show these two steps here. We can just use this equation. So whenever it gives you a value that's your final amount and says nothing about the simple interest, we can use this equation to help solve. So let's plug in our values into that equation. We know our A value, which is our end amount, is 500. Our P value is what we're trying to find, so we leave our P value there. Then we have 1 plus our rate. We calculate that out as 0.04. And then we have our time, which is 3. So we plug those all into our equations, and then we need to rearrange to get the p all by itself. So let's start doing some of these calculations here. Let's do our 0.4 times by the 3 first. So that gives us a 0.12. Our next step in this solving is we can put what's inside of this bracket all together. We're just following our BEDMAS there. Do everything inside the bracket first. So 1 plus 0.12 is just 1.12. And then our last step to get p all by itself, we divide out by our 1.12. So when we do 500 divided by our 1.12, we get 400. Sorry, computer's having a lot of issues today. Sorry about that. 446.4. Now it's technically in your calculator 428. But we round up to 2 decimal places. Remember, we have to round up to the 3 because the following number is bigger than 5. So because it was an 8, we round up to 0.43. So we have that our principal is $446.43. So that means, to answer our question, we would have to invest $446 today to be able to buy our computer in 3 years, which would cost our $500. So again, we need to add in our therefore statement. So therefore, we would invest, or we would need to invest again, need to invest $446.43. And that's our answer. Okay, so at that point in time, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. For whatever time is remaining in class, there's a simple interest worksheet. Make sure that you practice with this worksheet. The trickiest thing with the finance is being able to understand the different pieces because they're all word problems, and often people struggle with word problems. So the best thing to do is practice. So please make sure you're attempting the simple interest worksheet with questions on them. You'll notice that on the back, on the bottom, and upside down, I just have the final answers posted. That way you can check to make sure you're doing it right. So that's a nice way for you to regulate to make sure whether you're doing it correct or not. And so you make sure that if you can't get those answers, that you ask so that you can figure out what you're doing wrong so that you don't make those mistakes when it comes time to assignments or tests. So hope you guys have a good day. I will be back into the classroom at lunch. If any of you have any questions that you want to stick around, we'll be back shortly after the bell rings. Otherwise, have a good day.